So I want to get back to watching his clip series, but Bellular has taken the time to, on his main channel, his main gaming channel, which does cover things outside of Blizzard. I think this was not the WoW channel, if I remember which one I clicked on. To say no king rules forever. Blizzard, you can't ignore the competition anymore. For anybody that feels World of Warcraft could ignore Final Fantasy, that's definitely a level of ego, right? That's a fighter saying, I don't need to prep for this fight because I'm a big deal. I don't need to eat right. I don't need to train. I got this. And so that is a level of ego and hubris that oftentimes allows somebody that didn't have the resources, didn't have the background to come in and win. And that's what's happening here. In current health of these games, in almost every single comparison, Final Fantasy is beating World of Warcraft right now. There are a handful of ways where just due to their sheer size and pedigree and resources, World of Warcraft's still ahead, but that is because of past deeds, not how they are currently executing on their plan. I don't think it's an issue of devs caring. I don't think it's an issue of devs not showing up to work and working hard. I think it's just an issue of execution and communication with their community, and that I think there are some gaps there where Final Fantasy is just doing it better. And on top of that, to layer on top the fact that we just went through massive worldwide delays in almost every single industry, and Final Fantasy made some heavy retooling that caused a massive patch delay early on for their history, a 2-month basically silence as they basically tried to retool and do things they had never done before. And I think Final Fantasy on the inside said, we can wait this out. And there are businesses in your local communities that probably made similar sets of decisions. Is this thing just going to blow over, or is this thing going to linger? And obviously, based on the way it turned out, that makes one the right decision in hindsight. But looking out, it was reasonable to think, okay, well, what if this isn't a big deal? I don't want to retool my entire business for something that's just going to be gone in 6 months. And so I think there's a lot at play here. And so I just want to let you know that as he's becoming a bigger fan of Final Fantasy, in this video, I am likely going to be defending Blizzard. I haven't seen it yet because 6 months ago, if you'd had me and Bellular have a conversation in real life, I likely would have had to represent Final Fantasy because they're not getting represented nearly as well as they deserve. But he's incredibly frustrated with the franchise, rightfully so. And I just want to make sure that there are no cheap shots in here. This is one of his scripted videos. Bellular is an incredibly balanced and well-spoken creator that I have immense respect for. And so if I'm disagreeing with him, it's just because I want to make sure that he's not kicking them while they're down. If they're standing up straight and looking him in the face, then absolutely the only way Blizzard's going to get better is to wake up. And Final Fantasy's going to have to get a couple of clean hits in. And that's totally fine and deserved. But I just want to make sure that both sides get represented here as we dive into this.
Right then, when we talk about World of Warcraft, right, we usually talk about it in a bit of a bubble, don't we? Because we talk about what is WoW doing right, what is WoW doing wrong, how are we, the players, reacting, and so on and so forth, off in our own little bubble, in our own little corner of the internet. But what, as a community, we rarely address is how external factors impact World of Warcraft. How the world and the other games in it threaten or inspire World of Warcraft. Because we're in a time where even though COVID drove people to gaming, Blizzard still lost monthly active users. So I'm here to say this. Blizzard have got to stop ignoring their competition. And with today's sponsor, NordVPN.com /
All right, Nord paid him for audio in his video. I do want to say his production quality is impeccable as always. I think everything there is a fair statement, and I think that in general, yes, a lot of this comes from simply thinking they're immune. And when we see things like wildfires in California affect a company based in California, it's easy to say, you know what, that's just unique. But something like COVID was worldwide, and so it's hard to ignore that Final Fantasy just handled this better. It was the same thing worldwide. Everybody got stuck at home. Everybody had to adjust. These companies have huge teams, huge resources, and a huge player base. And Final Fantasy just pivoted better. And these are as close as we're going to get to apples, and they just did better. They did a better job. So as we move into global gaming, be sure you guys are protecting yourselves on the internet with whatever form of VPN you want to use. Many of them sponsor YouTube creators, which I think is incredible. And so I'm glad that he has a sponsor here to make his content possible. The production quality and the schedule and what his team does is amazing. And so I do want to just say thanks to people that sponsor YouTube videos in general for making this level of content possible, something well beyond hobbies.
As improvements, World of Warcraft is at one of the most critical points in its history. I really do think that. Since Wrath of the Lich King, expansions have been on a tick-tock cycle, right? For every expansion that has been super well received and has restored people's faith in the game, one has followed up that has in some way tanked WoW's reputation among...
That's an old IBM reference to basically what TikTok, if any of you are not familiar with that kind of idea, is that it's almost this like, oh, you have this A team and B team, and so there's these big moments of progression and followed by these lulls as we prepare for this big wave, and it's been assumed to be the case with expansions to World of Warcraft, where every other one has been more beloved for a while now. And so as we look at coming out of Classic, we go into the Burning Crusade, which was great. We go into Wrath of the Lich King, which was great. And then we go into Cataclysm, not loved. We then go into Pandaria, largely loved, which is where I actually fell out because of a lot of personal things in my relationship with the game. Warlords of Draenor, then meh. We go into Legion, loved. So naturally, people weren't that upset when BFA was not what they wanted because they knew that Shadowlands was it. We were going to be back on top. And so I think when people say they've had bad expansions before, why is Shadowlands something that people are struggling with? I think a lot of that comes down to emotionally they've been adjusted to this every other expansion. Here's when I go out and I spend time with my friends, the game is not as much, and here's where I jump back into that level of addiction and I binge hard, and I know that and I'm emotionally prepared for that. And so people who fall into believing that TikTok theory is at play here, I think Shadowlands is a really rude awakening because Shadowlands had an incredible launch. Yes, not all features were perfect on launch, but this gap between the fact that Shadowlands launched and then we are legitimately like, so are we talking 3 months, 6 months, 9 months? Is it possibly a year until the expansion gets its first big content patch, 9.1? That's very, very frustrating. And so that makes people wonder, well, like, then what were you doing during BFA? I was under the assumption of this TikTok theory where it was okay that you had a bad expansion because we were going into what was going to be great. And that's just not been everybody's experience now that they've gotten through their favorite content of Shadowlands and their kind of favorite and their not so favorite. And now they're doing things they either don't enjoy or they're just mad.
Amongst the wider community. Of course, BFA was that talk. Shadowlands should have been another tick.
Of course.
You know, the expansion that would right the wrongs of Battle for Azeroth and restore World of Warcraft to the heights of Legion. So far, that's not happened. It has not. And it's not looking that likely, is it? A second Tock, to carry the analogy, it might be more than WoW can actually take. That's the fear. Because if patch 9.1 and 9.2 don't provide proof of a change in direction, what's going to happen is that Blizzard will find that they have burnt a lot of bridges, that a lot of goodwill will be gone by the time 10.0 rolls around. Right now, Final Fantasy XIV is actively dunking on World of Warcraft. Names in the WoW community are actually engaging with that game now, and
that's Preach Gaming behind my face right here. So we just reacted to this, actually.
If they aren't asking about the game, they're playing
Pyromancer?
Loads of us are. Even some of us are doing sponsored streams. And that shows a degree of community targeting from Squeenix. Right, of course, when Blizzard is...
Wait, Square Enix is sponsoring World of Warcraft players to play? So Yoshi P, the director of Final Fantasy XIV, recently said in an interview that they pulled marketing campaigns during COVID because they thought it was distasteful to take advantage of people putting in extra playtime simply because of the pandemic. And I think that in some ways, in some players' eyes, threw a little shade at people who did run marketing campaigns, companies like, like Halo coming out, World of Warcraft, but they had a launch coming up. They had a launch coming up, and so he didn't. And so, yes, there is commendation there that they pulled PR, but I did not know that some people were sponsored, and I think that, this shows that, like, a lot of it is timing, and being able to punch that hard, that's big. That's a fast change. There's no way they could have known a year ago that this would be where they're at. That's a way to roll out resources quickly. That's an incredibly hard gut punch. That is, it's for the fact that they have love and respect for each other as games. They also play some things close to the vest, and they are competitors. They are friendly rivals in the same way that sports teams are. Some athletes on two teams may vacation together, but on the field, no. They're not pulling punches. And so that's a swing that they should hope never goes on the other foot. That's a bold swing.
Busy spending their time jamming their feet in their mouth over controversial public test realm changes, worries over Classic, the Burning Crusade monetization, and
The Burning Crusade monetization is just the most recent bumble in the way they handle PR. It's the most recent disconnect with the way they're handling it. Effectively, as they moved from World of Warcraft Classic into the Burning Crusade, existing subscribers to World of Warcraft, whether they're playing retail or Classic under the one subscription, get to keep playing and get Burning Crusade for free. They get to move their character over for free. But data-wise, you basically, when you log in, are asked, do you want your character to be a Burning Crusade character or a World of Warcraft Classic character? And it assigns those. What they were charging you for was the right to duplicate that character so it could exist in both places so you could play both games. They're not charging you for the purchase price of that game. How much that should be charged? Sure, that's a number that somebody has to do some analysis on and decide. The number isn't really the issue. It's that it got presented that they're charging you to take your character, and once that narrative got out there, people were already mad. And so even once there were corrections, there were just so many moments that this is don't you have phones, this is you think you do but you don't, this is Diablo Immortal in general being announced at BlizzCon rather than something like an E3 where it is meant to be this, it's something for my phone to bring new people into the franchise who don't have access to core platforms, not people who can take time off work, fight to get tickets, and be at a convention in Irvine to learn about hardcore games as hardcore fans. That's not what that's for. It's the wrong place. It's just another PR problem. The thing itself, needing to make money to make games, is not the problem. It is that Blizzard continues to make easy to fix mistakes. Of course, easy to fix is hindsight. I can't do what they do, but compared to Final Fantasy, compared to somebody in their space, in their weight class, they're just getting outclassed right now.
Lots more. And while that's going on, Square Enix are basically moving in for the kill. With a new expansion trailer, a 60% discount to their entire game, that comes with 30 days of game time.
That's not fair. So the 60% discount is because if you pre-order Endwalker, you do not own Endwalker until it comes out in November. Until November 19th, early access November 23rd. You can cancel that pre-order if you so choose. And so they cannot have the pre-order give you access to Shadowbringer, Stormblood, Heavensward, and A Realm Reborn going backward. The free trial gets you through the base game and its base expansion, Heavensward. But after that, to be able to continue to play past level 60, which you would want to be able to do if you want to be ready for Endwalker on day one, you need to own the current content. And you're asking people to purchase the current expansion mere months before the upcoming expansion. And so that discount is just a reaction to what is a fair market pressure. I don't want to wait until November to play. I want to get through the free trial and keep playing. And so a 60% discount around that hype, and then timing it, of course. Honestly, I don't know why it didn't run longer. It makes sense to sell the complete edition at 60% off. And then it comes with a month of playtime because it always comes with a month of playtime. That wasn't added for this. And so I think that's a little bold of a representation. I didn't even let him finish the phrase because I've heard it used by many people. And that is not the entire picture. That is them selling content as it is expiring, That is bread that is past its expiration but not moldy. Shadowbringers is an incredible expansion, but why would I pay full price for Shadowbringers when it's going to be thrown in for free with Endwalker this November? Why would I not just wait? And if I just wait, what if 9.1 comes out and I'm happy? You're going to want to introduce people in while they're hyped. That just makes sense.
Time, and their recent, extremely successful and shockingly emotional FanFest, they have got a veritable army of happy players who are proudly inviting other people to join their game. They are actively evangelizing, and it's working. It is working.
A player asking a friend or a family member, a community asking a content creator that knows those community members, is a stronger recognition than any ad campaign, any sponsorship could ever get. Getting people to try the game, then talking about what it is, and talking about it in the language that that person's used to receiving. Reacting to Bellular's clips, especially when they're not as scripted as this, I've seen a very raw side of Michael, and I don't necessarily agree with him. And I don't necessarily have the same priorities in games as him, but his co-host Matt, his writer, is a Final Fantasy XIV player who knows Michael personally. And so he doesn't sell Michael the way I would sell Michael. He sells Michael the way he knows Michael needs to be sold. And that's not a manipulation thing. You do that with your friends. If you're talking up your favorite restaurant and you know, I hate eggplant, you're not going to go on and on about the eggplant parm. You're going to go on about the dish that you already know I'm going for. The thing that you hope I would try. You're not going to take me there to hope I'm going to try something I'm going to hate. And so if you're talking to a friend that's into narrative, you're going to talk about how strong the narrative is. You're talking about somebody who's into raids. It has good raids too. Why would you not talk about the raids instead? And so I think that this evangelism is it's the long play. Taking care of your base, taking care of them, can do way more for growth than marketing dollars ever could.
Blizzard are, of course, used to fighting off competition in the market. They released Classic The Burning Crusade on the same day as Elder Scrolls Online's new expansion. As an example,
They get a lot of crap for that. If I was a shareholder in Activision, or if I was a player who played Blizzard and wanted them to have long-term success, why would they not release it? First of all, launch windows are not 365 days long. There are specific times a year that have advantages for gaming. As we move away from conventions like E3, having the hold on those things go away. As we move, there used to be a Christmas season, and then people who realized they couldn't keep up there's now this big spring launch season. But there are already prime seasons. They used to be themed really heavily around the gifting thing. But as we've moved away from physical things and moved to these more ongoing titles, that's kind of faded. But there are still ideal dates. There are still days of the week that perform better. But them saying, hey, I've got a 2 to 3 week range. I'm not going to sit on this content for 6 months and damage myself to hurt somebody else. But I've got a 2 to 3 week launch window. Do we want to launch before somebody else comes out and catch those players? Or do we want to launch while they're already enjoying that other game? I mean, come on. I don't think that's... So it's been thrown out as like they're punching hard. I think that's just good business.
Of course, despite players complaining about it being too soon. About the pre-patch not being long enough. They knew people wouldn't like that, but they clearly knew, or at least in their own heads, that ESO had to be fought. Back in 2016, they practically killed the hero shooter Battleborn with the timing of Overwatch's beta. And World of Warcraft patches and release dates have intersected with key Final Fantasy XIV dates in the past, to their benefit.
Sure.
Now, for Blizzard, the shoe could very much be on the other foot. New World is a new MMO coming out in August, and while Amazon are absolutely shooting themselves in the feet at times regarding monetization, there's no small amount of hype for that game, and yes, even from some of the WoW community. We've got Ash...
And even though they're backed by Amazon, which is huge, one of the ways they're getting around, why would I stick with you? You're not even going to make it, is that they're making promises to continue to fund the game, whether or not its launch is successful. They're continuing to, because they have the resources to do that. Play to your advantage. And so I think you can't rely on a big launch event or that servers are going to go smoothly or any of that. You don't have the background of getting better and better at launches compared to games like World of Warcraft and Final Fantasy. So play to your strength. What's Amazon's strength? It's money. It's Batman. Its superpower is being rich. And so, like, use that. Use it. Absolutely use it. And New World is. What does World of Warcraft have over that? They have a long-running fan base that wants to play new content. Okay, how are you going to take that on? Well, I'm going to give them new content prior to the rich guy flashing money.
Of creation, another major game for the WoW community, they actually moved their alpha start date away from the Burning Crusades launch. But that's a game with loads of attention from the WoW community. Then, of course, you've got Elder Scrolls Online, which has just slowly been building momentum and adding to the game over many years, with just about everything that I hear recently being pretty positive. There may have been claims of WoW killers, like Wildstar coming, in the past. But none of those WoW killers were successful, right? But none of them came around at the same time that Blizzard, well, acted as badly as they do now. None of them had a Blizzard that was its own worst enemy, to the degree that Blizzard right now is its own worst enemy.
That's fair.
Look, this is not going to be an emotionally driven takedown of the game, and I do not intend for this to be some sort of unwarranted negativity. But we can't run from what's going on. We have to accept reality and deal with it. There is no amount of burying our head in the sands and pretending that it's all going to be okay that's actually going to help, that will be useful, that will have utility. So we're going to engage with this, what's really happening. There are the concerns that the community has got with WoW right now. The development team does not seem to care about what players want. I said seem on purpose, emphasis on seem, because they obviously do care about what the community wants, but they're clearly unable to act on it quickly. A great example of this is the new customization options that were one of the most hyped things about Shadowlands, that were very well received. So seeing all of that after Shadowlands launch, Blizzard then said that they would not be focusing on customizations for the foreseeable future. Why not? I mean, seriously, why not? It is what the people wanted. Now, obviously, they wanted that to be an expansion feature, so that...
For any of you that have ever worked in a large company, a large corporate company, there's a bureaucracy that forms, and it's wildly inefficient. It appears out of necessity. If you have everybody just doing what they think is best for the company, it's chaos. And so you end up putting a few managers in charge to kind of make sure everybody's at least facing the same direction. Even if for one person, that's not optimal for them, it keeps us all moving, and it lets us act as a unit. As that unit gets to represent dozens of people, hundreds of people, possibly thousands of people, you need those managers to have managers to keep all the teams facing the same direction. And you need those managers to have managers to keep all the teams of teams facing the same direction. And it gets layered deeper and deeper and deeper. And the bottom people are forced to act further and further and further out of what feels optimal and individual to them. It can be incredibly frustrating, but it offers stability to the entire unit, and it allows the entire thing to move forward. It's the difference between a cruise ship and a speedboat. The cruise ship can do incredible things when it comes to distance, the number of people it can serve, the fact that there can be water slides on the boat at the same time that there's a concert playing downstairs and a putting green off the back. They do incredible things with the amount of features they bring, the amount of money they make, the amount of people they serve, and the impact they have on the world. But when a cruise ship tips over, it tips over not because of an instant moment. It tips over because of a series of things that are capable of turning over a ship of that size. They don't turn on a dime. They don't. And so when you compare big studios to indie studios, where it's somebody like Bellular's team, and you're talking about a handful of devs versus WoW, they can't achieve what a cruise ship like World of Warcraft can. They can't. They just can't take on that feature list. But as Final Fantasy gets bigger, those differences aren't there. you're talking about a cruise ship and a slightly smaller cruise ship. And so it starts to become a lot less excusable. Because, yes, maybe they don't have quite as many features on their ship because they haven't been quite as big for quite as long. But there is still a water slide. There is still a movie theater downstairs. Maybe that movie theater doesn't have multiple screens, but it's still a movie theater. And as Final Fantasy gets further and further in, as we talk about 6.0, going into 7.0, 8.0, that's a lot of expansions. That's a lot of legacy content for a new player to mess with if the current content isn't appealing to them. That's the advantage of long-running MMOs. So Final Fantasy is building up a lot of the resilience that has helped World of Warcraft weather these storms. Those storms use up slack in the line. They use up goodwill that the players have begun to trust and give to them. And Final Fantasy hasn't spent a bunch of time burning up that goodwill. People liked Heavensward. Most people, not all, liked Stormblood. People love Shadowbringers. If Endwalker is good, they will have had a run of mostly good MMO expansions. Blizzard has a TikTok theory as just an assumption about how they work, where we just assume half of their content is not going to be our taste. That's an enormous long-term problem. That's a chronic problem, and steering this ship is massive. And so staying in touch with the players is something that they're not always going to be able to do. You have to make these choices way, way, way in advance. You have to predict the future for this cruise ship. It cannot pivot because there's something going on Twitter. And yet we see Final Fantasy sponsoring WoW streamers. And yet we see Final Fantasy, there are these moments where their ship seems to be able to do something that the captain of the World of Warcraft cruise line says, well, that's just not possible. Well, maybe you need to explain to me why that slightly smaller cruise ship is able to do something. And as that slightly smaller cruise ship, according to some analytics, might become the same size or larger, why does it still look, is it just that they're that good at predicting? Why does it still look like it's able to do something that you can't? And so it does become very, very frustrating when World of Warcraft can't cater to its base. And the big difference there is communication. If the captain comes on and says, I hear you, here's the plan for now, here's how long these things take, in a live letter, in a recent patch, a live patch presentation, which we get 2 of for every patch cycle in Final Fantasy, there was a second half where they had a member of their team that handles the scheduling for the entire Japanese region sit with him. And of course, it had to be the Japanese region because of COVID. And he said, hey, I have counterparts in other regions. Let's talk about what my daily schedule is. Let's talk about how long it takes to plan, how long it takes for these things to come to fruition. Let's give some context. Not because I need to apologize for something, but because the next time something is asked for and we either don't respond right away or tell you it's going to be a while or we're not sure if it's possible, you have some context to why I'm telling you no. It's not that we don't care. It's not that we're not trying, which is the immediate assumption in both games. It's that I've given you some context. And so before the internet can go turn up a fervor about how mad they are, there's already somebody in the comment section, not a Square Enix employee, not a Final Fantasy dev, saying, hold on, we knew that it was going to take them a long time to respond to this type of request. And they're stopping it right there. That communication is key between interviews, live letters, FanFest presentations, written posts. We hear from Yoshi P and his team, I would say roughly 100 times a year. We hear twice for every patch. We hear multiple times through live events and Q&As. We hear they do interviews throughout the last media tour. I believe he gave 30 interviews over one event, each one to different people asking different questions. So it's not 100 over 52 weeks where they're evenly spaced, but we get these big waves. We get these small contextual waves. World of Warcraft has tried communicating a lot in the past, and because they got pushback, the answer was not to get better at it. The answer was to stop. And I think that that's finally coming to hit them.
That's why they did that, and they don't see it as being the perfectly efficient thing to do in terms of allocation of resources. Maybe that's the actual reason. But for the community, that doesn't matter. They got hyped up for a thing, they thought it would continue, Blizzard said no. Another point is that Blizzard don't, or cannot, communicate with us in an open fashion. We do not get blue posts on the public test realm for what things are supposed to be, or
why,
how they're supposed to work, or what the developers even intend. If people are offering free labor as testers, at least make use of it.
And that is not to say they're not reading what players are saying. That is not to say they don't care. That is not to say that it's not driving. We know they are. Bellular himself made videos in the PTR for Shadowlands talking about the state of Torghast, and Torghast was implemented drastically differently based on the feedback through the PTR. Some people thought it was made better, some people thought it was made worse, but there is a stark difference between what Torghast was in PTR in the early stages, what it took to unlock it, what it took to get involved in it, and what it became. A drastic difference. They are listening to this feedback. They want to make a good game. They wake up in the morning, they work hard, they work long, they crunch, they're underpaid, and the internet says they're crap and don't care. They do this because they do. They do this because they're proud to work at Blizzard. They're excited to tell their friends and families they took a job at Blizzard working on one of their favorite games of all time. They do this because they care. They're passionate. But they don't show us. And so for people that know that and people that believe that, there's no way to defend it to the people that don't. While I feel it, I don't feel it so strongly that if a friend of mine says, I'm quitting WoW because they don't care, that every single time I can muster up the energy to go, yes, they do. Sometimes it's just easier to say, I get it. I get why you're quitting. I'm not quitting because I know they care and I believe they can do better. But I don't believe that so strongly and with such strong evidence that I can tell you that it's worth your money to believe they can change. I can't do it. I continue to stay subscribed to World of Warcraft because I believe in them. And I believe that there is a day that if we bring in new people and we reestablish a new culture in an industry, that there is a version of history where Blizzard can become a better state than where it is. But in the bottom of every single video over on Work to Game, there is a link to the free trial to try Final Fantasy XIV. That link does not benefit me. That link does not help Square Enix decide on if to invite me to things. It does nothing. It just links you to go try the free trial. It's in videos when we talk about WoW. It's in videos when we talk about Guild Wars. It's in videos when Brian and I introduce ourselves to a new portion of the community or talk about upcoming changes to the schedule. It's in our default video template. And talking about this, as I start to slowly build out a template over here on what is a much less formal, more casual thing where I don't really have a description, it is one of the things that will likely make it into the template here. I don't have a WoW link for that. Because while I like World of Warcraft, and I'm happy to state that, and I'm not hiding it, I don't feel so strongly that without context, I should put a link in my video encouraging a complete stranger to click on it and try a game that I believe might burn them.
Because the current blue posts that they do put up in the 9.1 PTR are woeful in comparison to what they used to do in the past. As it stands, we don't get anything from Blizzard, actually, overall, that is not passed through corporate public relations, or is delivered by an individual who very much seems like they've been trained for PR. Basically, they rarely feel real. There's then the conduit energy problem. And I bring this up because it does not affect me. Chances are it doesn't affect you. And that is exactly the point. Why does this system take up so much development and community time when it does not matter to the majority of players?
That was Mike over at Preach Gaming interviewing the director, as the director made a statement that I believe that exact facial expression, if I'm going to remember the interview offhand, was to a statement where he said there was feelings in the differences between damage based on DPS output, and the director of the game said that is false, and that gear is weighted the way it's always been geared, and that is a difference in player skill exclusively. Now, he later went on to say that he was going to look into it, because it's possible that when you talk about the overlap of multiple systems, such as conduits and all of that, that the gearing is doing something different than what they're picturing. But offhand, he basically said, your question from the community is wrong, because I know it's wrong, because the players who are saying it are bad. I don't think that's what he meant. Ian Hanakostas is not as good of a public speaker and as Yoshi P. I don't know if his background exposed him to more of it than Yoshi P, but Yoshi P has done years of showing up over and over. And so public speaking, whether you start good at it or not, is a skill that can be worked and trained. And that Ian has not done that. It's not part of the job description of taking on director of a game, but it should be. It is something that has made him stand starkly against Ian. Ian came from being one of the leaders of the guild that was known for the theory crafting of the game, and he worked his way up through Blizzard out of passion for the game, and he cares. But notice, none of that was because he charmed his way into the job, because he was good at speaking. He was analytics based from the get-go. He ran a guild that handled elite theory crafting. Maybe I'm doing a miscategorization there, but somebody can feel free to correct me in the comments below. Ian is not equipped for those interviews in the way Yoshi P is. Not because he's not equipped for the meetings he's sitting in on, not because he's not equipped. Those are separate discussions. But those interviews, it's very easy to make a statement like that you may go back later internally and say, you know what, we've actually looked at it, let's make some changes. It doesn't matter. You made that statement publicly, and now that's what people heard. That you think that their perception of the game having something wrong with it is because they're bad at the game. They heard that, they felt that. And the answer is to not go and hide and never talk. The answer is to get better at talking. The answer is to go practice this and to go build up some rapport by sharing your own frustrations with the game, your own joys with the game, and becoming somebody that we have a relationship with. Coming in and saying, well, I wanted to give you your space, so I just never talked to you. That's not how I went on my first date with my wife. Hey, I think you're really great. I was going to go hide over here for a few years, and then I'll propose to you to marry me. It's going to be great. No, you have to spend time with somebody, and he doesn't spend time with us. I don't know how much he plays the game. I know Yoshi P plays the game. We know his class. We know his race. Now, I know individually that Ian used to play, but what is he currently playing? Maybe there's people that know. But you ask any Final Fantasy fan that watches news coverage of Final Fantasy, and they can tell you class and race and possibly whether he uses controller or keyboard of Final Fantasy. They can tell you. Not because that's important, but because it's part of a relationship, just like you can name the class and spec that your friends play. That's a problem.
Players in the game, and just makes the game worse for those who it does matter to. Remove it, or fix it in an afternoon and move on. Some people say this doesn't impact them, and therefore it doesn't really matter, that it's not something that's really worth weighting that highly in one's criticisms of Shadowlands. I completely reject that line of thinking. I say that this is a design that is bad in principle, and that the developers are sticking to it is bad. We should be worried about the quality of the World of Warcraft development team's decision-making if they think that Conduit Energy is something that should remain in the game. Even though Conduit Energy doesn't matter to most of us, in principle, there is a big issue here. We need to start talking not about the symptoms of problems. We need to start talking about principles. Moving.
I think that's the difference here. The execution comes down to what's the goal. Every expansion can be such a hard pivot. And so chat here is saying that some of them do know what Ian plays, and some of them do know that he plays with the community. There are core principles and core consistencies where even things that are disliked in 14 are now tolerated. People who play 14 not for story know there will be story with every patch that has to be cleared before they get to the new dungeon. They know there's things they need to clear. And so it allows them to go past something that's maybe not their favorite part of the game. It's a narrative-based MMO. They know that when they signed up. And so they know that they're going to have to push escape through some story because a huge portion of the player base does care about story and feels that it's incredibly important and that all things and all systems to make story successful are going to tie back to it. And so for them to ignore it, they're going to know it's present, and it's always present. It's ever present. There is a consistency that I think Ian lacks. At the beginning of BFA, I seem to remember him doing basically live letters. Am I just missing him doing those with Shadowlands regularly? Because outside of BlizzCons and his interview with like Preach Gaming, I don't feel that I regularly hear from him. I don't feel that we get the number of blue posts that we do forum posts for 14. And so maybe as a casual WoW player, I'm just missing it because he is speaking to his high-end community. But I don't do a lot of the high-end content in 14, and yet I still know about the high-end content of 14 because Yoshi P tells me about it. So I think that Conduit Energy is an example of where they're not, the borrowed power systems in this game are just an example of where, like, I don't know where you're going from here. And don't get me wrong, the repetition of the consistency of 14 is something that longtime players get frustrated with. But, you know, it could be that Ian is likely a very private person. He took a not very private job. And so I don't know if there needs to be another half, right? A more front-facing portion of Ian. Yoshi P acts as both the director and producer and spokesman. Maybe there's a job that needed to have been created there. But their community team is something that has a hard job. And I don't know. The fact that he takes interviews with Preach is a sign that he does know it's important. I just think that if you have limited time and effort and energy that you can put into something, you have to decide that some things are going to be higher priorities than others, so that when life gets taxing, the things that fall off are the things that you therefore must assume are less important. And when he puts his nose to the grindstone to work on this game, and when life gets hard, it feels like communication with the community is the first thing to go.
There is the feeling that our time is not respected with World of Warcraft. And it's obvious. Between random conduit upgrades, brutally slow anima gains, and the entire renown system, which of course is them trying to turn obvious time gating, most games don't do, into some sort of system, even though we can all completely transparently see through what the renown bar actually is. Tell me, from a first principles perspective, why is the narrative content handed out to us piecemeal 20 minutes a week? Could you please tell me a story that's actually best paced in that manner? Are quests content that's supposed to feel like rations?
I would argue that's how TV used to be rationed. I think Handmaid's Tale went back to that this season. 22 minutes a week. I don't think that time gating on its own is a problem. It gives people a chance to sit. It allows hype to build, if that's the goal. If, however, the goal is to sell subs with retention mechanics, that's different. And for a narrative story that doesn't have a lot of player agency in it, for a narrative story that doesn't create that let's talk around the water cooler moment where I have to tell my friends, did you catch the new... You know, I feel the Saurfang story did that. The Saurfang story is, did you see it? Did you see the new Saurfang thing? I don't hear that out of these stories. And so, like, if you're going to do that, that pacing needs to be part of the design. And I don't know that it is here. And so it does appear just to be a retention mechanic in this instance.
Why does it feel that way? Alt-friendliness. That's another thing. We were promised an alt-friendly expansion with Shadowlands, weren't we? But it's not until patch 9.1 that we are getting things like the campaign skips that people obviously would have wanted, transferable soul ash to alts, and a bunch of...
They did not have to say an expansion was alt-friendly. There are actually many reasons that a game should not be alt-friendly, because it starts to become where it can very quickly transition to being alt-required. And so there are reasons to do that. Much like their stance on multi-boxing, it's not the choice itself that I struggle with. It's that their reasoning and their choice don't line up. They say that this is an alt-friendly expansion because that's what they want to encourage, and there's going to be these different paths. But then if you have multiple alts and any of those alts do the same thing, like walk through Shadowlands and need to do the Maw intro or want to select the same Covenant, you have to do that stuff over again. Now, obviously, because I did Covenant 1, I shouldn't be able to skip Covenant 2's story. That makes sense. But if I have two classes that I want to be in the same Covenant, because let's say I want to level all, 5 healers, and there's 4 Covenants. Let's say I put one in each because I want to expose myself to the story, and then I have a 5th one. Why is that one? That doesn't feel very alt-friendly. And for a game that can take a year to come out with a patch, it's not a full year, but it feels like it. how come you didn't anticipate that I would get to multiple characters? It sounds insane to say you have 2 or 3 or 4 characters if you're slammed with content. Many people don't do that unless there's a reason for it. But when you have this long, it's not hard. Many people through Warlords of Draenor, which was content light, got a lot of things leveled up, a whole stable of alts. And so it's not uncommon for people right now to have 5 or 6 or maybe 1 of every class. That's an immense number of alts, and you have 4 storylines. Obviously, you're going to be using some storylines more than once. And for them to, they put the word alt-friendly out there, it doesn't feel like it lined up.
Of other issues. I mean, why is the Maw not skippable? The Maw intro. 9.0 launched with a pretty big amount of chores to do for a character to feel relevant. Weekly Renown, the Legendary Memories, Torghast, the Maw, Stygia farming, the praying for conduit drops, and the conduit lottery of upgrading them. Overall, playing alts feels like you are fighting against Blizzard to play the game that they have designed and that you are paying for. Blizzard also seem far more interested in solving problems that they see than they are actually making people happy. Now, obviously, problems have got to be solved, but sometimes Blizzard's focus is obvious. We see it with Conduit Energy. We see it with no master loot in a full guild group. And we see it with the wide array of arbitrary restrictions that we feel in the game.
Don't get me wrong, 14 has these moments. 14 will ban you for talking about DPS meters in-game. 14 has banned creators for trash talk they said outside of game. 14 has these moments where people don't like that particular terms of service exists or is enforced. They don't like the way certain systems roll out. There are people that feel that Eureka is too much of a change from the previous Relic system. Boja is too much of a change from Eureka. There are people that feel that they're just making things grindy sometimes to make them grindy, because sometimes they are. There are people that feel certain systems that are simply outdated, such as in-game housing, are a problem. There are many times frustrations. I think the difference here is that when they don't want to make us happy because they feel it's better for the long-term health of the game, or when they feel they cannot make us happy because of various restrictions, they've addressed it. When they announced Viera and Hrothgar as new playable races last time, they announced 2 new races. And they did not include that the way they got 2 new races initially, they did not let us know out of the gate that when we were getting Viera, that it was going to be gender locked, which is something that they did not do. They said that they had made a statement 1,000,000 years ago that said they'd never do that. The way they got 2 races added to the game to add more visual variety to the game is they only did male of one and female of the other. That led to immense frustration for people that wanted to play that race but not that gender. And so they've added male Viera due to that, but they came out, and when they announced it, before anybody had a chance to respond, they said, and we're working on female Roth, but it wasn't able to be ready right now. They got out in front of it. It's not that they had to make players happy to calm them down. And are there people mad? Yes, there's people mad. Of course, people that wanted something and didn't want something else are mad that the thing they didn't want got picked over them. But it's not that Final Fantasy is perfect. Final Fantasy has a debatably very poor new player experience. It has whole features that have either been dropped when they didn't want to be, like Deep Dungeon, or have never aged well, or never been supported, such as these Eggy Glamours, the ability to change the cosmetics on one of our pet classes, which they started as a system and then never updated. There are frustrations within the game, within class balances, gear rollouts, the difficulty of things. The fact that we cut one of our ultimate fights, the hardest content in the game, for top-end raiders, it just got cut to keep patches on time. It's that when they don't make players happy, I'm going to keep coming back to this. They tell us why. And the reason lines up. As long as you're listening and as long as you're hearing them out, they come at it multiple ways. And maybe that's because their core language is Japanese and they know because of translation it's not perfect. But they will answer the same question over and over and over and over. And that gives us the ability to see them answer that question not from a script, but a couple of different ways. And that sheds context and light onto that so that we can say, okay, the first time I kind of disagreed with them, but I'm starting to get the hang of why they feel this way. It's the same reason, but coming at it from another angle, that makes sense to me. I don't like it, but I can deal with it. World of Warcraft gives you the one reason, and when you don't like that reason, it doesn't feel good. And then they're like, well, didn't you hear me the first time? And that's it. It comes down to sheer communication. And at this point, I think quantity is the single most notable factor, but quality is important too on that communication.
The extremely defensive and abrasive design. The most recent example of that, of course, is Keystone Master. It's going to require a lot more work in patch 9.1 because of the new Mythic Plus scoring system. And the easiest way to get score is, of course, to do every single dungeon on both Fortified and Tyrannical. Even though the community largely, and really largely does, despise Tyrannical at higher Keystone levels, with people widely refusing to play because of how imbalanced Tyrannical feels. What if players don't like our game? Force them to play it for rewards. That is the Blizzard way. Torghast. I mean, it's what's going on here. It's what went on with Torghast. Soul Ash is why Torghast cannot be good. And possibly the most glass-shattering thought.
The problem with rewards is then you cannot separate people doing the content who enjoy it and people who are doing the content for the rewards. It's not that things can't have rewards. Things do need rewards. But when the rewards are so good and so necessary that all people do it, then when you become an analytics-driven game, which World of Warcraft is, you don't have any data on what people are actually doing. You say, well, I see people playing this way. I can see it in our logs. Yes, but you don't know if they're doing it resentfully or if they're doing it while smiling. You don't have that in your logs.
And I think the thing is not discussed enough, the general lack of content in WoW. There is very little to do in World of Warcraft that is not part of the 3 pillars of Mythic Plus, raiding, and PvP. Almost every other type of content has clearly been left by the wayside, and all the rewards are largely locked behind huge world quest grinds instead. It'll be 7 whole months since Shadowlands has got any content. That's $105 of subscription fee on top of the actual purchase price of the game. That ain't looking like a good deal. Your 6-month sub that came with a mount or whatever will have expired by patch 9.1's launch. And of course, when 9.1 comes around, they'll almost certainly try to sell you on another 6-month bundle. Then
Final Fantasy has loyalty things. They do. It's not implemented the same way. I think I'm going to break this into 2 videos because I'm going long here. He's doing a good job being balanced. It's just hard to listen to such avoidable mistakes about a game that I do care about. Especially when he's comparing it to 14, where you can't ignore it. They have the same restrictions in many cases, and they're just doing it better. There aren't excuses. When you're the only big guy in the room and you go, well, it's hard being a big guy, we have to trust you. I don't have to trust you anymore. I can go fact check you. And so when you say, this is impossible, and Final Fantasy says, it is available, it just feels like you're only making a game, kinda.